You're listening to Penny Dreadfuls from the Moth Sanctuary.
The Piltor Hills are a lonely place that does not suffer men to come near. Of all the realms and all the lands that man can conquer, this is not a place for them. The rows of winding trees in the woodlands coil around one another like drunken wretches, their insanity fusing their branches together to form a near impassable spider's web. In the 7th century, the Saxons attempted to construct a fortress on the hill, thinking it would be an essential vantage point against invading forces. But the woods could not be navigated easily, and the current of the river that flowed through it was inconsistent. Sometimes it was as light as a stream, other times it became a great, rushing dragon. In the end, the effort became too great, and the Saxon army abandoned their plans for the land. It was their failure that spurred on Robert Dalton, whose name had become synonymous with conquering impossible odds due to his fierce victories in otherwise unwinnable situations while serving as a general in the Crimean War. After the conflict, Dalton traveled, and his reputation was further bolstered when he acquired an interest in a Nevada mining venture that soon proved to be rich with silver. With his notoriety and fortune firmly secured, Dalton returned home to England, where he declared that his next venture would be to build a grand manor for himself upon the Piltor Hills, on the site where the Saxons had planned to build their fortress. Using his newfound wealth, he bought the land outright and sent men to the forest to begin clearing away trees and making it habitable for a home. He did so without a care for the expense, the sanctity of the land, or the safety of the workers, many of whom died from either accidents, the elements, or the strain of the effort. Some died from starvation due to a shortage of supplies. When deaths occurred, Dalton simply replaced them. There was always a constant stream of poor, uneducated men looking for work, after all. At times, men reported seeing things through the trees that frightened them so much that they ran off the site and never came back. Others would get lost in the forest for hours and be found later, laughing and babbling to themselves about the things they had seen during the time they went missing. The ones who weren't lucky enough to be sent away to the sanitarium in the city were dumped on the streets, useless to anyone. If ever a place could speak to a man, then the Piltor Hills message was clear. Leave. Against all odds, the house was finally completed a few years after construction began, and Robert Dalton rode onto the grounds of his new manor, which he named Despectus. Once more he had conquered where others were denied, and he rejoiced as he laid eyes upon his new home, surrounded by what remained of the damp black trees and by his emaciated workers. The foreman informed him that though they had cleared most of the trees, there was one whose stump they couldn't remove. Rather than change the plans to the site, they salted the earth and built the foundations over the stump instead. Despite nature's efforts to cease their progress, a man of Dalton's ambition could not be deterred, and his house now stood as a monument to his dominance, burying the great tree which had stood proudly for centuries. He crossed the threshold for the first time, and the workers cheered. The woods shuddered under the weight of the heavy rain. He spent the rest of the day exploring his new home. Being a precise and fastidious man, he was going to make sure every element received his personal attention. From the equipment in the kitchens to the order that the portraits were to be hung on the walls, nothing escaped him. He had come ahead of his family to ensure everything was how he wanted it, in preparation of his wife and son's arrival in a few days' time. But to his pleasure, all had been executed in accordance with his wishes, and there was very little that needed correcting. The last stop on their tour was the cellar. It was here that a queer feeling overcame him. The deeper they moved into it, the more potent the feeling became. On the floor was a trapdoor, large enough for maybe one man to get through. This, he knew, was the source of his unease. He asked a member of his staff what the door was, and they informed him that it was an access hatch that led to the foundations. The great tree stump lay directly beneath it. Unable to bear it any longer, Dalton staggered back up the steps. Once he emerged, he straightened himself out and his equilibrium returned. He then issued an instruction to his staff that the cellar should have limited access, and that under no circumstances should the trapdoor ever be opened, unless personally ordered by him. The rain didn't stop all day, so when nightfall came, the moon couldn't penetrate the thick clouds, and the darkness was absolute. But Dalton had returned to his good spirit and didn't notice. He opted to stay in a guest room, saving the master bedroom for when he and his wife could share it together. The bed was comfortable, and the walls were covered in heavily polished oak panels, the wood of which was repurposed from the trees felled to make way for the house. He doused his lamp and lay his head down, allowing the darkness and the noise of the rain to envelop him. Sleep trickled over his eyes, gently at first, but then in a greater rush, like a stream that becomes a flood. It had only been a few seconds before he heard something. A creak, like that of a bowing branch. He was about to owe it to the sound of his new home settling, but then there came another, and another, until eventually it became one long, continuous rumble, like the hull of a ship dragging against the shallows. He lay with his eyes open, listening. It was spreading across the room, crawling along the paneling. He struck a match and relit his lamp, but when he shone the light to the ceiling and the walls, there was nothing. But the scraping, rumbling sound continued. He stood up and walked to the window, thinking that the sound may be caused by something outside brushing against the walls. Straining through the dark, he looked to see if he could make anything out. He opened the latch and pushed his lamp outside, but even in the dim glow, he could see there was nothing on the wall at all. He looked up for a moment and took in the night surrounding his new home. The air was damp and raw. His light caught the shine of an owl's eyes in the trees across the way. He closed the window and turned back to the room. There was still no sign of a cause, but the sound persisted. He sat down in a chair in the corner and proceeded to listen and watch that room all night. Just after the sun rose in the morning, it stopped. In the dark, the noise had confounded him, but in the light of day he began to think more practically. If there was no sign of anything in the room, or on the outside, it could mean that something might be happening behind the walls. He stepped out of his room and searched the halls, eventually coming upon a middle-aged woman in a smart-looking uniform who identified herself as Mrs. Riley, the housekeeper. "I need you to speak to the groundskeeper for me. Tell him to take a thorough look around the outside of the house to ensure there is nothing encroaching upon the brickwork. Branches, ivy, anything at all, he is to let me know. Once you've delivered this message, come and find me in my room. You and I are going to search for traces of the same thing on the inside. Understood?" He spoke with military precision, with a tone practiced in giving orders. He expected it to be met with bewilderment, but he was surprised when Mrs. Riley responded with a simple, "Yes, sir," and a bow of the head before making her way to enact his orders. Less than 15 minutes later, she returned, and the two of them spent the rest of the day going from room to room searching for any sign of disturbance that would give an indication of the problem. At one point, the groundskeeper tracked them down to inform them that he had found nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing was growing on the house. Everything out there was as dead as it should have been. By the time the evening arrived, their search had come to naught, but Dalton had found an admiration for Mrs. Riley's diligence and ability to follow instruction without question. "It must just be the room getting used to having a visitor, sir," Mrs. Riley offered, trying to make him feel less like the day's search had been a fruitless one. "I'm sure this evening you'll find it more peaceful," she continued. After being up all night and taking no food all day, Dalton was too tired to pursue the matter any further. He relented and agreed. He walked her to the servants' quarters stairway at the back of the house, where she bade him good night and ascended the stairs to her room. Dalton rubbed his eyes, sighed, and listened. The house was quiet. The rest of the staff must have already gone to bed. It was peaceful. No untoward sounds at all, and it encouraged him to the likelihood that he would have a better night's rest. He strolled the house, taking in the quiet ambience. It was a pleasant way to enjoy his new home. Eventually he found his way to the gallery hallway and looked up to the first portrait. Someone had scratched out the face. He let out a cry of disgust. Walking to the next painting, he found it was similarly mutilated. Down the whole hallway, each of his treasured artworks, bequeathed through generations of the Dalton family, had been scratched down to the canvas. He was beside himself with anger. So much so, he almost didn't notice that one of them was a painting he had never seen before. It was a portrait of himself, unremarkable but for the similar mutilation as the preceding paintings. The corridor went on further than it had when he had viewed it before. After what felt like minutes, he came to the end of it. A candlestick lay on the floor, the discarded instrument of the destruction. He looked at the final two paintings on the walls and gasped. The first was of him and his wife and son, all sat together with his arms wrapped around each of them. The next painting was identical, only his family weren't there. His arms were outstretched in an embrace of nothing. In both, his face was scratched out. There was a sound to his side. He turned, and where only seconds before there had been a wall, there was now an open door with a series of black steps leading down from it. He recognized it as the entrance to the cellar, where the dread trapdoor resided. But that was impossible. It was downstairs in a whole other part of the house. The feeling of unease from the dead tree was washing up and over him, filling him with revulsion. At the foot of the stairs, in the darkness, Dalton could only just make out the outline of someone staring up at him. It stayed perfectly still, as if caught mid-ascent and thinking it couldn't be seen. Dalton's breath shortened. He was filled with a unique fear, unlike anything he had experienced on the battlefield. He and the shadow stayed locked in their gaze for a few seconds before Dalton's feet started to listen, and he ran. He passed the defaced paintings, praying to see the end of the preternaturally long corridor and hoping that the shadow wasn't following him. Eventually he came to the end, but was stopped by the sudden appearance of Mrs. Riley, strolling across the adjacent hallway, carrying a tray. She spotted him and turned. "Oh, good morning, sir," she said with a smile. "I trust you had a better night's sleep?" Dalton gawped at her. There was a trace of dawn's light coming from somewhere behind the housekeeper. Somehow, another night had passed. "Forgive me, sir," Mrs. Riley said, "but you don't look well at all." When he had gathered himself enough to overcome the shock, he called Mrs. Riley to him, and they walked the corridor together. All was as it had been the day before. There was no endless corridor or misplaced door. The paintings were intact and hung as they should be. They spoke of what he had seen, and Mrs. Riley posited that perhaps he had been sleepwalking. But Dalton was far too pragmatic a man to doubt that he had been awake the entire time. "Well, when one has been awake as long as you have, sir, your senses are bound to play tricks." It was true. He hadn't slept for a moment since he had arrived at the house. His limbs felt heavy, his head light, and his eyes blistered. Yet he was so shaken by his experience that for the rest of the day, every corner he turned or passage he walked along brought with it the fear that he would return to that state of in-between, and the shadow person would be there, waiting. He made it to his room and rushed to his bed, afraid that if he hesitated, something would stop him from reaching it. He intended to sleep for long enough to make up for his lost nights, even if that took until when his wife and son arrived. Outside, the rain was still pattering on the window. The black clouds left the room dim enough for an undisturbed rest. He felt the approaching wave of sleep, could feel it creeping around his eyes, when there came a loud bang at the window. Dalton jumped and sat up. It was darker outside than it had been only seconds earlier. His initial thought was that a bird had flown into the window, but it was now too dark to see any telltale bloodstains from the impact that would prove this to be the cause. It must have been past sunset already. But again, that was impossible. Another slam at the window. Something heavy striking the glass. Then another. On and on, until it was a continuous thrum of impacts that resonated as loud as cannon fire. Dalton went to the window and focused through the gloom. He stifled a cry as he watched shadowed figures rising from the ground outside and hurtling towards the glass at great speed, as if being thrown there before instantly disappearing and another taking its place. They hit harder every time until cracks splintered across the pane. The banging was soon joined by the familiar sound of the ship hulk scraping above him. A crack appeared in the ceiling, and wood shards showered the floor as the fissure spread across the room, meandering its way to each wall and every corner, while the bodies continued to throw themselves at the window, threatening to break the glass open and let the wild woods inside. He called for Mrs. Riley, for anyone to come, but no one did. He made for the door, but it refused to budge. Someone had locked him in from the outside. He pulled at the handle and yelled with abandon to be released, but no one came. All night long, the bodies crashed against the window. The hulk in the walls slithered its way around the room, and the rain ceaselessly fell. When he was eventually found the next morning, he was huddled on the floor, wide-eyed and far away. Despite what destruction Dalton could plainly see in front of him, the shattered panes and cracked ceilings, no one else saw anything out of the ordinary in the room. After that, Dalton came to fear the coming of the night. He made no attempt to sleep. To do so only courted the risk of further visions. Instead, he stayed secured in his study, away from others. Someone had locked him in his room. There was no one he could trust. Within his solitude, sometimes he would hear the handle of the door shake, and instinctively knew that it wasn't a member of the staff. The shadow people had found their way into his house, but they couldn't get him in his room. After a while, though, he began to question whether this was in fact what they wanted. Him, isolated and alone, so they would be free to claim the house for their own and do with it what they will. The notion made him reach for the knob, but he thought better of it. Here he would be safe, until his wife and son were with him. The day of their coming arrived, and he was relieved to finally have them here. He hoped that their presence would put an end to all the strange goings-on, and give him an anchor with which to ground himself. He attempted to look his best for them, though his cheeks were drawn, his eyes were sunken and bloodshot, his clothing was unkempt, and there were patches in his beard from where he had pulled at the hairs. He stood by his study window, twitching with anticipation. Their coach came over the crest of the hill, and his heart leapt as they followed the trail down into the valley on their final approach to the house. The rain had not relented since he had first stepped foot onto the Piltor Hills. Though the workers had built a dam to divert the Piltor stream so as to create a road leading to the house, they hadn't accounted for the sheer force of the convergence of water from the neighboring hills after so many days of inclement weather. So as the Dalton family's coach approached, the dam burst, sending an unrelenting torrent of water down into the valley. It was more than the horses and coach could handle, and Robert Dalton was forced to watch as the valley rapidly flooded, enveloping the vehicle and its passengers entirely. He screamed and sprinted out of the house, but there was nothing he could do. He could hear their cries over the rush of the torrent. The water devastated all it came into contact with, and after unknowable minutes of despair, his wife washed up on the opposite bank. He made to swim to her, but the current was too strong. The groundskeeper held him back before he could jump in. There was nothing anyone could do. She was stuck there, just beyond his reach, lifeless. His son was never found. From then on, Dalton spent long hours sitting in his study, staring out of the window, cursing at the rain. From his vantage point, he could still see his wife's body exposed to the elements on the bank. Though the downpour had diminished slightly, until it stopped, the floodwater wouldn't be able to drain from the valley and allow passage to or from the house, so they had no way of retrieving her, nor of notifying anyone of what had happened. He heard the phantom sound of the accident regularly, as if it was echoing through time. It mostly occurred at night. This reverie went on for days, and this time he did not sleep through stubbornness, afraid he would dream his family alive, and then have to undergo the agonies of their deaths again when he woke. He became convinced the owl eyes he could see on the branches of the forest's trees at all hours were the shadow people looking back at him. If he moved suddenly or glanced away for too long, he would lose sight of them and would have to spend a long time calibrating his eyes until they came back into focus. A floorboard creaked behind his chair, and there was the quiet patter of many feet entering the room. They came to a stop behind him. "Mrs. Riley," he said dreamily. "Sitting here, I've had some time to think. And do you know what I've realized? I don't think I ever met you before I found you here. In fact, I didn't meet any of the staff before I found them here. I didn't hire any of you." While he spoke, he didn't take his eyes off the shadow people outside. "We've been here since the beginning, sir." He nodded. "Thank goodness. I couldn't have chosen a better team to look after this place, so it's a good job you found me." "Indeed. After all, this land is our home too. We'll take care of the house, sir, until the day the trees grow through its windows and roof, and it is claimed by the woods. We shall keep it for you." He smiled and gratefully whispered, "Thank you, Mrs. Riley." "But the spirits of the woods are restless, and they are angry, sir. You know this. You've seen it. You're not safe here. But there may be one place where they won't be able to reach you. The place where we came from. No visions there. No sounds. Nothing but quiet and peace." "Yes," he said. "I know where you mean. Yes. I'll be safe there." He lowered his eyes from the window. They all walked with him, guiding his naked, doddering form through the hallways, and he smiled at them in return and expressed his gratitude for their help and pretended not to see their shadowed faces, even as they stepped down into the cellar where the trapdoor waited. The shape that he had come to know as the groundskeeper held it open. Dalton wondered how he had ever felt so revolted by it before. He saw now that it was a sanctuary. Here, under the house, in the dead ground. He descended into the hole and crawled into a cramped and cold but safe space. He looked up and smiled gratefully at the assembled group. They were more than his staff now. They were the custodians of his home. Despectus was theirs. They would help keep it safe, shadow forms or not. He took one last look at the light. The trapdoor came down. This story was written and read by Andrew Bate, with music also by Andrew Bate. Penny Dreadfuls from the Moth Sanctuary is an audiobook series by Moth Sanctuary Productions. You can subscribe to the series on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, and YouTube. Follow Moth Sanctuary Productions on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Or for more dark delights, visit mothsanctuaryproductions.com.